still believe that there is a fundamental truth, a truth to me that is far, far more important. That truth is, if you want to do something, or really want to do something, don't wait to be asked. Don't seek permission. Don't put off until you have passed the right exams or saved up enough money. But be prepared to risk complete failure. Don't give a shit about whatever your mates or your girlfriend or boyfriend think. Whatever it is, start now, today. Tomorrow is always too late. Always too late. Always too late. Always too late. Always too late.
Hi there again. This is take number 3, so I'm doing a little bit better on it. I got, I don't know, about a third of the way into it and realized that the mic wasn't working. I'll have to start that over again. Anyway, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. I'm going to have to split this one into a few parts here. That's my little snapshot from my outline sheet, which is now 3 pages and 1,100 words, so I think I've gone a little bit overboard. Again, gee, there's a shocker. So I'm going to break it down into 2, maybe 3 videos, but 2 for sure. Specifically on SARS-CoV-2. That's what we're going to focus on very particularly. A couple of corrections I need to make from the last video. Boo-boo that I did. Mr. Rose, I spelled his name wrong. L-A-R-K-I-N is how I spelled it, so I apologize, Mr. Rose, for getting your name wrong. And from here on in, I will get it right. If you ever happen to see this video. Secondly, I talked briefly about some drone action where, you know, we're going to have drones flying around scanning you and seeing if you fit the COVID description and then having the cops called in you. This was going to be out of Australia, and I only mentioned the breathing rate and the heart rate. So I wanted to also include the temperature, so we'll take your temperature and whether you're coughing, so the action of what you're doing, coughing, sneezing, whatever, which is as creepy as it comes next to having a microphone on board. That, you know, again was a little bit far away because it was in Australia, even though it was a Canadian company, but here we are a week later and it's going to be unveiled in Connecticut. They're going to be doing some trials in Connecticut already. So we can see that this is already starting to go. This is exactly what governments do when, given the situation that we have right now, they will extend their power and reduce your rights. This has gone through history. It just happens and happens and happens. And so the fact that we're just kind of, you know, letting this happen here too, we have to be on guard. This cannot be allowed to fly, as it were. So in Canada, we really want to be on drone guard because this is a bad thing. It really, really is a bad thing. The last one was my mouse. I think this is probably a rat. I didn't realize that my mouse pointer was not showing up on the screen, so it probably sounded a little weird when I was talking about specific things. I was actually circling with my mouse, but it didn't show up on the screen, so it may have sounded a little bizarre and weird. So this time I've made a little change here, so hopefully we get the circling. It won't be so weird, so my little buddy here can go and carry on. Going forward too, I thought it was probably a good idea if I would state my position or where I am coming from. And I think you maybe find that helpful here. It just gives you some ideas to you know, what I'm all about. So I invite you around my campfire here, and we'll get my position out front. And away we go. So I talked about my position on this whole SARS thing on the last video. That I don't think it's warranted. The economic shutdown is not warranted. The fear and hype is not warranted. It's a way overreaction. We're doing some major damage, and we need to get back on track very quickly, and then we'll sort out the details after that. But right away, we need to get back on going. We need to get doors open and businesses going. Many of the comments, well, all of the comments that I will make throughout these and any other videos are done under a backdrop of my other primary goal, and that's to educate people on the idea of Austrian economic thinking, libertarianism, the Rothbard version of it, and a change in our monetary system. So I kind of think through that filter already. So I just wanted to bring that out to the front so that it kind of maybe puts a little context into things that I may say that may sound a little weird or a little like utopian or it's not possible, but that's where mine coming from. So one of the big tenets of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. And it can be boiled down, it's derived from natural law, and it can be boiled down to the following 4 points really concisely. There's a little bit more to it, but the idea is it can be distilled down to the first, to the four. It's based on private property rights. So that's where it comes from. That's where it stems from. And it's private ownership of person and body. So your person and body, that's your own private property to do with as you please. And then it's private ownership of justly acquired goods and services and land. I guess you don't acquire services too much, but goods and land. And land being not just the surface land, but also minerals and things like that. There are natural resources that are in that. So justly acquired meaning you didn't steal it from somebody. You actually, exchanged something of value, or however it was exchanged. There was an agreement there, and you honored that agreement. So that would be the justly acquired. The big one is the number one, though, the private ownership of person and body. No one has any right to tell you what to do, when to do it, at all. You are the only one. And conversely, you don't have a right then to tell anyone else what they can and cannot do, and so on and so forth. I mean, you can tell them that, but they don't have to listen to a word you say, and you can't force your views upon them. So stripping now to the four items that I mentioned for the non-aggression principle. The first one is don't commit violence against another individual. Don't threaten violence against another individual, person, or property. Don't steal other people's stuff. And don't wreck other people's stuff. It's that simple. It's really, and if you start to think of all the laws that we have, they will boil down to something along these four lines. So just start thinking about it. It's really astounding. You can see how simple it is, and yet we have this huge, complex legal system, and we don't really need it. We just need basically these four tenets. There was some wording changes here too in the idea of putting violence in there versus saying harm. Harm was the original, because again, this is not new. This goes back hundreds of years from philosophy stuff. Thomas Aquinas, maybe one of the first to come through with that. But anyway, the idea was that harm was a little bit too subjective, because it is. So a perfect example actually is breaking up in a relationship. You may be causing harm to as the person perceives harm, but you don't necessarily see it as harm as yourself. But again, you'd never be able to terminate a relationship if you had something that you wanted to follow it. So it's actually physical bodily violence, which makes more sense when you think about it as well. So that's it. That's the four tenets of the non-aggression principle. And an easy way, and assuming we had a court system that also was competing privately, competing against other court systems, we don't need any of it that we have currently now. They can all go and will all fit under this particular banner. So I want to look a little bit more at the how I put this is basically from my website. I put this out a few weeks ago, actually probably going on about a month and a half ago. And it's just my idea of common sense of what we should be doing. Again, I'm not a doctor, so this isn't medical advice in any way, shape, or form. You do what you need to do, or what you think you need to do in terms of protecting yourself and your family and whoever you've agreed to protect. And this was just a common sense kind of items and common sense step checklist that we can go through, that we don't need any of this other stuff. So again, I don't claim to be any sort of expert on this. I'm not a doctor or anything along those lines. But just with some common sense, we do live in a hostile environment. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is hostile from the ground all the way up, out into space. Our planet exists in a solar system that's in a hostile environment, that lives in a galaxy that's a hostile environment, lives in the universe, and on it goes, as far as we know. So we just we understand that. So we have two choices then, as I put there. You can, given this fact, we can choose to cower and hide, but that's not living, that's just basically existing. Or we can face reality, which it is harsh, and we just tackle it head on. So tackling it head on means that we have to accept that we can't prevent everything from happening to everyone. It's not possible. It's impossible to do so. It's unfortunate, but that's just the nature of our universe and the way it works. So in terms of specifically with our the SARS-CoV-2 stuff going on here, it's a great time to refresh the children on hand washing, the when, the where, and the why, and for ourselves, because we forget about this. Now, I'm going to talk about it again further down when I talk about sanitizer near the bottom there. This doesn't mean washing your hands every 6 seconds, right? But there are common times when you do it. If you're playing in the muck and you're coming in, if it's just before you're eating, after you go to the bathroom, those kind of things are just common sense stuff that we should be teaching our children, and we should be doing ourselves. I admit that as a food service person, a hospitality person for many, many years, I do have an advantage in this because we're trained to do this very thing. You always are washing your hands all the time. I don't like sticky stuff in my hands. It drives me crazy, so I extra wash. And then, as I've joked about it a few times, it only takes one time with a bucket load of jalapeno peppers and you forget to wash your hands and either touch your eyes, your mouth, your nose, or worse, go to the washroom. You will never make that mistake again. So we do have an advantage, the hospitality people, because we do this. But it should just be habits that people get into. The sneezing and coughing in the close proximity of others, meaning the expectorant can easily land, and this is part of the idea behind the idea of the social distancing. So you get people that spit when they talk, you get people to clear your throat. If you sneeze or if you cough, that will generally release moisture molecules from your body, which is potentially a problem when it comes to transmitting this particular one. There's no real proof that it's going aerosol and stays aerosol, so gravity will take over and it will go down. But you can eject a pretty decent rate when you're sneezing and coughing. You shouldn't be doing that anyway. If you got friends and family that do that on a regular basis, you may want to either have a chat with them or get new friends. You can maybe not get new family, but you get new friends. But the idea is you get your arm up here, because technically speaking, if push comes to shove, sneezing or spitting your goo on somebody else in some way is technically a form of assault, because you are actually potentially harming someone, committing violence against their body and their property. And if they haven't asked you to sneeze and goo on them, then you technically could say that's a form of assault. So really, we should just be doing this or this. If you can't do it, you turn your head. Just basically don't fire stuff off into people's direction. Don't fire it into places where people are going to eat or sleep. It's just common sense, but sometimes habit, you just need to get into a habit to do that. As always, good nutrition, lots of vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc. These are three things that go a long way to building your immune system. And again, you can see that's a problem this time of year, and why we have influenza issues, because the Earth's tilted, right? That's why we have winter. So you have less UV radiation coming down. You have less vitamin D. We tend not to be outside, and when we do, we're dressed up or covered, so you don't have skin exposure to create the vitamin D that's going. So this is why we have issues in the wintertime. And of course, then sticking everybody in their house for the last few months is not doing anybody any good, because anytime, we haven't had the greatest weather here, but there has been some sunshine out there. We're not getting any of that. Next step would be to encourage your elder relatives to hang in tight at their homes. You work with them to provide alternate means to obtain necessities, and then these same relatives can be checked on in person with a few basic protective measures in place. This is just common sense stuff. Visit through the screen. Generally speaking, people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s don't have the same fast-paced go lifestyle. They're quite happy as long as they got their stuff around them and their family and friends close by or accessible to them. They're quite happy, and so I would be, I know. So you know what, you just make sure they're good, check upon them, but don't worry about it, and then just kind of stay away if you feel the need for this concern, then just let them do their thing and you do your thing. If your elderly friends and relatives are in a long-term care home or residence, you postpone your visits. If the administration has not already restricted it, if check and see, again, obviously this is basically common sense stuff. And then assuming the facility has an elevated risk or critical risk protocol, which they should have, or they're not worth the money they're printed on, you inquire what actions are being taken, you make your voice heard. And if quite frankly, if it's not doing what you want them to do, you make that voice heard, or you pull your friend or family or relative out of there and you go somewhere else. Some folks may say, well, that's not, you know what, if there is a will, there's a way, and especially now we're seeing more and more of these facilities are cropping up because there's a market for them. So it's up to us to take responsibility for this, and if you don't like the way the residence, the care is being handled, then you make your voice heard and you pull your money. That's as simple as that. Children are just basically at the discretion of the parents. You shield your children as required based on age and overall health. If the child's good, if you can see with this current issue, I don't think there's been any deaths under 18, definitely not under 10. However, I wouldn't want to risk that for a 6-month-old or somebody a child that has a immune system that's not been developed yet. So ideally, then you just take precautions to keep them shielded away, and you're done. It's that simple there. If you're not comfortable attending the large gatherings, you don't. You stay home. That's great, but you don't hammer down on those who do. If they want to choose to go and hanging out with other people who choose to go, you have no right to say and poo-poo, and if you want to call it what you call it, but don't expect anybody to follow those wishes, and you don't get mad and rammy at them if they want to do their own thing. And you stay home instead and organize your smaller events with your neighbors. All sorts of things you can do, but we don't have to be sitting out the window looking and calling the cops on people, your neighbors or your friends or family. I mean, it's just insane. Discuss work from home possibilities with your employer. Some gigs you can, some gigs you can't. That's clear. And if your employer's not interested in discussing that, then you ask yourself if that type of person and company that you want to work for. Give yourself a real look-see. Keeping some hand sanitizer, commercial or homemade, close by. This is always a good thing anyway, and it's just almost for injury perspective, because constantly bathing yourself in hand sanitizer is not going to do any good either. What that does is put you in an antiseptic world, and if you ever meet into the smallest little, weakest little germ, turns into a great big huge problem because you haven't built up any immunities, and kids haven't done that. So going too far in the antiseptic ways, but you want to keep some of this stuff around because there may be cleaning, there may be toilets cleaning, you might have an injury or cut, you need to get that antiseptic on there. So it's good to have that stuff around anyway, but you just use it in moderation and only when need be. And then in this particular instance, just keep in mind the fact that at this point in time, still you stand a better chance of landing pneumonia than you do with this thing. So we just have to keep our wits about us and our head about us. And so the bottom line is there's no need for the wholesale shutdown of entire regions. Not for this type of thing. And if it was much worse than this, the shutdown would be inevitable because we'd be dropping like flies. And that's clearly not the case. So basically, there it is. Those are just my guidelines for my personal self, what I would do, and I recommend if anybody's asking me. Again, I'm not a doctor. It's not medical advice. So don't sue me if you take it and something happens. But this, to me, is just common sense. And basically the steps we should take. Following the non-aggression principle and everything that goes around with libertarianism, in that world, you would have every right to stay home. You just stay home. If you don't want to do it, you don't do it. And that's fine. It's up to you and your choice. But, you don't then force other people to do the same thing that you are. You have no right to do that either. But that's a bigger topic for another day. So I want a quick look at our current stats here. This is from the 22nd. I know it's getting a little later. It took me a while to get this whole video put together and out. So I added accident statistics in here too because, the idea is you can't compare SARS-CoV-2 with, say, heart disease, because I generally don't go to a grocery store, touch a lettuce and then my eye and then end up with a heart attack. That's just not how that works. So we want to keep it kind of an apples-to-apples thing. But accidents can happen at any time, kind of the word accident. So they can happen at any time, and even in the best protected environment. For example, you're walking down the sidewalk, minding your own business, and a car comes flying up there and corks you. You were doing everything you should have done, and then yet the accident still happened. So I took a few off for compensating in terms of people that would take a snowmobile out on a millimeter of ice, for example. Well, that's an accident you fell through, but you know what? You got to pay to play. That was coming to you. But an accident would be that same person on a foot of ice, and then they fell through. So that would be a pure. So I took a few off just to pad that a bit to compensate for that. And we're still at 4,114 deaths in that same time frame. We've had 1,871. Influenza is still at 23 a day, increasing, so we're at 6,335. So still over, we're still, now it's not half, it's getting a little bit higher. We're still quite far away from just even the regular pneumonia and influenza stuff. So I want to ask a few questions here, and this is just rhetorical questions. And the very first one is not meant to be deliberately obtuse, facetious, any of those other words you want to throw in there. I'm posing it more from the philosophical perspective, just to get us to start thinking, just to start thinking, and that's all. So the very first question is how do you know anything is going on at all, right? So it sounds pretty stupid, but start thinking about this for a second. We know from day to day what's happening in our lives because we're experiencing it. We generally know what's happening in our close personal relationship lives because we're experiencing it either directly with them or directly via them. They're relaying it to us very close by. These are people you would rely on. These are people you've had experiences with before. These are people that you generally have an idea of their honesty, their perceptions, and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of this bigger picture, other than maybe a neighbor, a friend, or a family member who may work in a particular clinic or a particular hospital or particular this, particular that, how do you actually know that there's anything untoward or out of the ordinary going on? And in fact, those people even working in an individual place may not know anything beyond their own individual place because that's the only thing they see. So how do we know that there's any sort of anything about anything going on? Well, the deal is we get it from the media, from people we don't know. We get it from scientists, say, government authorities, say, sources close to such and such a department, say. There's no names. We don't know these people. We'll never actually probably ever see them. We won't be having beers with them. So are we actually going to trust them to tell us exactly what's going on and shape our entire perception of events based on a bunch of talking heads on TV that we have no idea who they are, what they're about, or anything along those lines? So start to think about how our reality is shaped, because we can't be in every hospital. I'm still using the SARS as our context here. You can't be in every particular hospital or every clinic, or don't know anybody that's going to every particular one, so you put it all together as the bigger picture. We don't have that right now. It is possible, but it's just not happening. So therefore, we don't know. You only are relying on information that's coming through from talking heads on TV, media, newspaper, web, people you don't know, basically, is what it is. So we need to really start thinking about, well, if you're saying it, why should I believe that? Where are the facts and the figures? And there aren't any. All we're getting is a lot of goo, and they're changing the goalposts, and stuff is changing as these videos will go on. I hope to show as much as I possibly can anyway. So just something to keep in the back of your mind about this and any other of the major events that's going on that's beyond the scope of our day-to-day. How do we really know anything's going on? We really start after putting questions and red bells in there. So our next one here is the tests. Are they detecting a coronavirus family virus, i.e. the cold or the flu, or are they specifically testing for SARS-CoV-2? I don't know the answer to this question, and I have yet to be able to find it for Canada. So again, what are these things telling me? Are they telling me that everybody that's tested positive just because they have the cold, right? Or is it particularly the SARS-CoV-2? This is critical information that we need to know. So we need to find this out. Again, I'll keep searching, and I'm sure it's out there. I just have to keep hunting, and I haven't got really to it yet. Another thing here is the steady amount of testing each day, or is it come and go in batches, which will then explain why we have a huge rise of this, and then a fall of this, and a rise of this. It depends how this testing is ongoing. If it's ongoing and is a steady amount, then we should see steady results, either positive or negatives, that are going up. So this is a question that we need to know as well. Are the test results, are they dated from the day of the test, or are they dated from the day of the result? Which could be two different things. If I'm tested on Tuesday, but they're not picked up from the health unit and put and processed until Friday, what day is it processed now? What day is posted? Is it Tuesday, because that was the day the swab was taken or whatever the test was, or was it Friday because that was the day the test was processed, or the following week or whatever it was? This again will change the number pattern, and it's important that they are, in my mind, they need to be recorded on the day that the swab was taken. That should be the date that should be recorded as a test, even if it was tested positive like a week later. The meaning is that you had the whatever they're testing for on the day that they took the swab, not any time in between that. So that's again another piece of information we know. This one we've got some more information about since I posted this, and this is the fatalities recorded, and especially in the States, we are finding out that they're now recording damn near anything with SARS. If you even look like it, smell like it, smoke like it, you're going to be a COVID-19. It was ridiculous. So the idea is, have you died with the SARS-CoV-2 or have you died from it? And it is very vitally important that we know the difference. I can't understand why this is, well, I can. To me, it means that we have an agenda. We've gone past the incompetence, because it's just way too incompetent. We've gone past the political grandstanding, the looking after myself first, all that kind of stuff that you get from politicians, generally speaking. We've gone past that. The numbers are so ridiculous. The goalposts are so being moved ridiculous. The statements are absolutely so ridiculous that the only thing that can be left is some sort of agenda that's happening. And we need to find out what this is. And this is part of the whole thing, is how these specific... Why would you do this? Why would you change that? It doesn't make any sense that you would actually then say, well, you know what, if they cough or smell, or if you just kind of think they have this thing, just mark it down as a thingy. Well, I mean, come on, man, that's just insanity. And the last one here is, why hasn't the mainstream media been showing the images from hospitals, given how easy it is these days to blur out any identifying features, and the fact that they can get a damn hazmat suit and put it on? It should be in there showing us the exact thing. I look back at some of the footage from war-torn countries even recently, but as far back as you go, and you see the press out there with their flak jackets getting their heads blown off, and body parts exploded and all sorts of nasty things to get the story that they have chosen to do, because that's the profession they've chosen. And yet in today's lame-o, ridiculous mainstream media, we don't get any of that stuff at all. And then they claim, well, we don't want to contaminate this, or the privacy. It's a bunch of bunk. And so therefore, again, that just shows to me that we've got some sort of something going on here agenda-wise, because the mainstream, unless the mainstream media is totaled, maybe it's completely totaled, who knows. Anyway, just a bunch of questions there that we need to kind of look on it and go. So I want to look here a little bit more again at Canadians' numbers. This is from that spreadsheet I showed last week, and I'm just going to hopefully flip over to my stat screen here. Let's see if this actually works. Oh, look at that. And there's my mouse. Is my mouse showing up? There it is. Aha, got the mouse. Okay, so this is basically from the spreadsheet from last week. I've just been modifying it a little bit to make it look a little purtier on TV. The Canadian one doesn't look as nice. I just got started on this, I think. So I wanted to look at these numbers a little bit closer, because actually it's quite important that we do. So in Ontario here, our population, so this was on the 23rd, 14,446,515. It's easier for me to say those numbers than try to stumble over the great long word. So we have 12,879 total cases, 6199 of the active cases, and 6680 of the closed cases, and then splitting those closed cases out, we have 5967 on the recovery and 713 on the death side. The total percentage of our population that's been affected so far by cases is 0.09, so not even 1/10% yet. I mean, this is absolutely astounding that we've shut down the entire province, the country, the planet, and this is what we've got. Not even 1/10% of being, it's insane. The recovery probability is rounding up to 90%. And so this here is where it looks really dramatic. So we look at this 10.67%. Well, we have to look at that a little deeper, because that death percentage is only against this number here, because that's all we've got is the total number of cases that have been recorded. And then if they're in a hospital, they come in, even if they haven't been tested, if they come in for treatment, they will be tested at that point in time, and then it will be determined whether they have the antibodies or whatever test they're doing, the DNA, the PRC test, or the antibodies test. But the case is that it's this total case that this number is the percentage of, and that's why it's high. But let's look at this a little bit closer. I've broken this out. This is from the Ontario government. So I grabbed their CSV, comma separated value sheet, put it in my spreadsheet, ripped it all apart, slabbed it all up, and came out with these numbers here. And basically this is what I called the high-risk group. And so the high-risk group is not so much the 50. See what they've done, and I don't know if it was on purpose, it's just the way they do things, I don't know. In their spreadsheet they have a much better breakout of ages, so it's 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But when they're reporting it on their website in the news, they're talking about 49, so for example 40, so it's 40 to 59. Well, that's 20 years, and the 40s, anybody who's gone through the 40s to the 50s, there's some pretty dramatic body differences between the two. And looking at that number, it actually was more in the 50s and less in the 40s, but it gives you the idea that it reaches down into the 40s as well, and the numbers they're dumb that way. So I split them out the way they're supposed to be, and they have them recorded there. I haven't made any guesses here. I've just pulled them out with a filter. So this is barely a percent here in the 50s, so we can get rid of them. The 60s, we can actually turf them too, because it's yes and no, 7 or 8, but we won't. We'll just go for it. So the idea is here that 98% of this 10% are from this group here. So if we take the 50s off and take that off, that leaves us about 88%. So 88% of the folks that are contributing in this group, so 70s, 80s, and 90s, which you receive the influenza, the common cold, like any of these, because it's a high-risk group. They have compromised immune systems. So those particular 3 and this 5 at 88% of this 10%. So we're left with a couple of percent in terms of people. Now, we have to break this out again, because this is still only against this number. When we put it against the population of the whole in Ontario, here's what it is, 0.005%. Wow. So in the next slide with Canada, I'm going to put some comparisons against that and show you what we're comparing that 0.005% to. So you know what? You probably can't see that with me. I got to do this over here. Oh, apologies. Anyway, I've been circling stuff here. Here's the 98%, which is 88%. The death in population total, this is 0.005% against deaths against the total population of Ontario, which is the way you need to calculate that number. Here's the total cases, and so this number here, including all of these, represents 98% of this almost 11%, leaving about 1% left over for all of the other cases. So very minimal impact to the usual group. It's, again, the same stuff you would see with the flu and pneumonia and all of that, the high-risk group. So let's look at Canada as a whole. Here we'll go to the other side. There we go. So it doesn't look quite as nice yet. I'm not finished with my formatting here. So Canada, we have 37,674, 770, 41,790. You're going to put my mouse over here. Thank you. 41,791. Active cases 25,664. Closed cases 16. And so the same numbers. We don't just barely over 0.1% in Canada, which is hardly anything, statistically irrelevant. We have a recovery rate of basically 87%. Our deaths are a little bit higher, although the percentage now, because we're going against the higher case number, is about was it half or so, and the mild cases they have 25,000 of these 41 are mild, so basically 97% of them are mild of the current outstanding cases. This is all we have, and as I mentioned last week, we need to find out the breakdown between the serious and the critical, because it's the same thing as the same principle as the age range. We may have 550 just serious, which means I went to the hospital, they looked at me and said, here, take this medication and go home. I stayed overnight and then I went home. We don't know. Or it could be 7 critical, 7 ventilators. That means there's a big difference there. We really need to know that, but that's not been brought. I can't get that data out yet, so I'll keep looking for it. So back to the same then populations. This here death number of 2,141 is against the full population of Canada and represents 0.006%. So you have a 0.006% of dying of, you have a less than a tenth or just over a tenth of a percent of actually contracting it, and 0.006%. It's not even statistically relevant, and yet the country is shut down. Ridiculous. So here's my accident number, same number I used in the previous one, so that works out to 0.035. The pneumonia is the same one at 0.23, again comparing to this one. And this air pollution I threw in there, this is an estimate from StatsCan, but air pollution is also something that can happen anywhere. It's not a matter of touching things. You may not have the option not to ingest it like you would some sort of virus that's traveling around, or bacteria. So it made sense in there. I took a little bit out just to kind of give it a pad room, and I think it was 14,000 people per years estimated by StatsCan. So take it a little bit out. That left me with 0.039% chance of air pollution. So you actually stand more chance of accidents, pneumonia, and air pollution by a long shot than you do with this current SARS-CoV. And yet the country is shut down. We're being told this is the end of society as we know it. Absolutely ridiculous. It's a snow job we're being had. We'll find out soon enough what we're being had about, but we need to be on guard for that. Okay, so we'll go to our next one here. I wanted to look at the 3 studies again. I mentioned the Oxford one in the last thing. There's a German one I haven't been able to find yet, but I haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to hunt them down, so I will do that next for the next video. But the Oxford, there's a new one from Stanford, another one from USC, so we'll take a peek. So just to refresh your memory, the Oxford one basically was saying that, and of course my mouse isn't going to show here, unfortunately. I got to work on this little mouse issue. But midway through the paragraph and going down to the bottom, it suggests here that basically 68% of the UK would have been infected, would have had the SARS-CoV virus by March 19th. Now that was modeling, so again it's model data, which we always have to take into account and be, it's not skeptical with model data, but we need to know what the data was. We need to know the modeling decisions that were made, and that needs to be peer reviewed with people who are specialists in modeling, and we always then as recipients of that data have to understand that it is a model which really represents best guess. That's kind of what it is. The guesses clearly are not working because the models are failing horribly in the States, and we're going to look at here in Ontario quickly and find out that it's not doing so well here in Ontario either. So basically what they were saying here is that by having that many people infected based on their model, it would indicate that these virus does not have the kill factor they're talking about, does not have the troubling factor, because they've got far more people that have it than are warranted by the numbers coming into hospitals. So that was the Oxford study back in March. Stanford released one last week. It was on around the 14th it came out and was published. They came up with the same idea, but now they're moving a bit further away from modeling and now actually surveying people and looking at actually hard data. And so they're estimating that there would be a 50 to 80-fold increase. So what they're saying is that there's a larger chunk. So I'll read that whole thing. The prevalence estimates represent a range between 48,000 and 81,000 people infected in Santa Clara County by April, which is 50 to 85-fold more than the number of confirmed cases, which then is suggesting that this virus is not nearly as deadly as it's being made out to be, because far more people have it, and they're either not experiencing any symptoms, they think it's just a bad cold, or they fall into the case range where they're actually detected as a case. So there's been some critique leveled at the methodology, so we'll have to follow that back up. One of the guys doing the study was going to release some further information and address some of the critique against it. So I'll follow up with that and see where that goes, and make sure that their modeling was sound and that their methodology for doing the experiment and the survey was sound too. And I'll get back to you on that one. This was one that just came out the other day, on the 20th from USC in LA, and it's confirming the same thing, different range, but now the same number. So they're saying, which translates into approximately 221,000 to 442,000 adults in the county who have had the infection. So they're saying again, it's an estimate that's 28 to 50 times higher than the confirmed cases done by the recorded by the county, which again is then saying that this isn't even remotely close to as deadly as it is being portrayed by governments and media. It's not even in the ballpark. So again, these are very early. These are very preliminary. I just want to bring them to attention and then follow them up in a future essay. So here I want to look at quickly the Ontario model reveal. I remember that back in April 1 or 2, Doug Ford had this great press conference and had this big model reveal. It was all hushed tones and talking all dramatic and big fatherly love and all this rigmarole and shenanigans that government and politics always want to do. So I want to revisit that now, because of this particular thing that showed up the other day. The Ontario government released updated COVID modeling, which shows that the enhanced public health measures, including staying home and physically distancing from each other, are working to contain the spread of the virus and flatten the curve. They're saying it actually peaked on or around the 20th. Okay, so we're going to look at that further in a minute. But I want to bring your attention here one huge point. It's subheadline and first paragraph. Modeling shows physical distancing still needed to prevent further spread. The first line in there, second part, which shows that the enhanced public health measures, including staying at home and physically distancing from each other, are working to contain the spread of the virus. My question is, prove it. Because you cannot. This cannot be proven. This statement cannot hold any water. The only possible way that this can be proven is if we had a rewind button. We could then rewind back in time, only change one thing, whether it's the physical distancing or whatever you want to do, close something, and then you run the experiment through again. That's the only thing that can change. Even the little butterfly that was floating on the plant has to be in the exact same spot at the exact same time. You cannot do this. It is physically impossible. The only work that we can do that is science, basically, science experiments, and if anybody's done one, that's exactly what you do. It's what we do in computer troubleshooting. Well, you change one item, run your test, see the result. Change one item, run your test, see the result. Same thing with a scientific experiment. You run your scientific experiment. You have a baseline one that's running. You make your change, and then you keep your baseline running, and then you change one item, and you reset, and you redo the entire thing, but keeping everything else the same. You cannot do this with this kind of thing. It's impossible to do. Economics suffers from the same problem. You can't do experiments with economics either. So this is a bunch of hokum. It's garbage. You cannot say that anything that they've done has done anything. You can't. There's no way to prove it. So this statement is completely fallacious and ridiculous and should hold no water whatsoever. But let's look a little closer here now at what they've got to say. So this was the slide deck that came out that particular day, and these were the numbers that they had at April 2nd when this came out. So I just want to give a little context to where we were at that particular time in the slide deck. So what did come out of the slide deck, which was quite nice and handy, was this little timeline measure that they gave out, which was a beautiful thing because this is the kind of thing that is going to prove that they're full of shit. Look at what they've done here in this. Basically, starting, I'm going to have to work on my mouse problem. This is really annoying me because I'm wiggling my mouse, but I know it's not showing. If you're looking at, I would think probably the 17th of March is basically it because everything was shut down. Shortly after that, March 23 was the last of the non-essential stuff was closed down, and the only thing they have changed since this presentation on the 2nd of April was shut down construction that they hadn't already shut down, and what is still remaining has now been closed. Other than that, everything else is essentially the same as per this timeline. So March 17th was really the big kind of one. That was one when everything shut down. That was an emergency declaration. And then moving ahead to March 23rd. So that week is pretty much the deal from the 17th to the 23rd. Now let's look at the little chart here. Oh, so now it's from the other. So I'm going to move ahead here. Oh, sorry, hold on. Please bear with me. I'm still working on my keyboard stuff here. There we go. So let's look at that. Now, if you can see, this is from CTV. If you look down here at the chart on the right and look at the bottom there, you can just barely see the March 22nd, March 23rd. Look what the numbers are doing. They're steadily going up and up and up and up right through past April. That's almost 6 weeks into it's a 14-day cycle there. It's 14 days, the virus is dead. It can't transmit after 14 days. Here we are coming up onto 6 weeks. All of this crap is going on, and it has not made an impact on the cases. Again, it just goes to show garbage. All of it is garbage. Let's look at the drama that they pulled out here. So this is projected Ontario cases by April 30th, which is just 6 days away from now. 80,000 cases against the 12,000 we have right now. 80,000. Give me a break. This is what they scared the crap out of all of Ontario for. And this guy, that doctor guy that did this presentation, you watch it still on their webpage, he was quick to point out the very dramatic numbers. But look at this whole thing. 300,000 cases, but then again they make this stupid statement. 220,000 cases prevented by current action. Prove it. There's no way you can prove that. It's absolutely ridiculous. Come on, man. And there's 80,000 cases there is this current scenario, and of course they wanted to pad that if you want to add some full future intervention, 1250. That's only the one that came kind of close, and yet they haven't done anything further. Again, as mentioned, it was only the shutdown of the remaining construction. That was it. 80,000, come on. Projected Ontario deaths by April 30th. Again, we're looking at 1,600. Now, admittedly, they're getting, kind of closing in on that one a little bit, at 713. We're still less than half away with their current intervention. But again, they make that stupid statement, 400 deaths prevented by current action. And again, I challenge you, Government of Ontario, prove it, because you cannot. It is impossible. So go on, beat it. Current intervention there, and then, of course, full future, which they never did in the first place. So this is what they scared the hell out of Ontario with. Look at this. Ontario, over the course of the pandemic, and didn't even talk about what the course of the pandemic was. Is it 10 years, 1,000 years? I mean, come on. 100,000 deaths without public health measures by the course of the pandemic, which is following the curve of the flu. It's peaking now as they're saying it. They're not the only ones saying it. There's other places around the planet that are saying the same thing. It's following the same peak curve. The last of the flu was in... I have to look that up again. It was March 4th, March 3rd or March 4th. They stopped reporting on the flu because it had peaked and was now down on the other side of the flu. So basically, essentially, our flu season is kind of over, going from August to April. is over. And it's the same thing that happens, the same, and of course the influenza is also coronavirus. It follows that same pattern. So look at this horror. This is totally irresponsible. These people should be fired for this. This is crap. 100 things. Give me a break. You terrorize people for nothing. This was another nice one too here, showing you all the nasty, bad things, ICU. Of course, notice all the emotional stuff and all the fear and fear-mongering, the buzzwords and all that. Talking about the ICU beds, and you're going to need them, and Well, look, again, I can't move my mouse, but if you look there, April 1st, look at that little green one down there. Yeah, that's the Ontario confirmed cases, right? And they don't even have this on this chart. These would be cases that they're confirming need to have ICU, right? So they're below 200. They're barely even made, you know what, their current bed is just touching the death rate. So in other words, this entire chart is not even worth your time or my time. This here, again, you can help us change outcomes from Ontario's by staying at home and physically distancing. Prove it. Prove it to me. I don't know how that works. You know what? I'm not even good. This is just propaganda stuff. I'm moving on here. So we're done with that. We're done with the Ontario government stuff. I don't want to go there anymore. But just you can see now exactly how much hook'em is coming out of here and how much overblown this is. And it's shown by that chart. By having no change in the case numbers and the increasing case and the increasing deaths, even in the face of 6 weeks of their thing, which was only supposed to be 2 weeks because that was apparently the entire intubation period of the thingy. So we've looked at that already. We're moving ahead here. And so now I want to take a quick peek at fear before I wrap things up, because now I've gone way longer than I thought, even in the part 1 of this video. Fear is a big problem, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. But we're just going to read this out there. The deep-rooted fear of contagious disease, hardwired into the collective consciousness by historical events such as the black and bubonic plague, and maintained throughout popular culture, Hollywood movies, Outbreak and Contagion, for examples, and they mean that people are without question highly susceptible to accepting extreme emergency measures, whether or not such measures are rational or justified. The Black Plague and Ebola are gross. They really scare people up because you're leaking and bleeding from all over the place. Black Plague, you all got gooey and, well, black. It freaks people right out, and rightly so. And of course, as I mentioned, the Hollywood movies, TV as well, has pumped that up. The New York Times called for America to be put on a war footing in order to deal. Everything's on a war footing. It changes the whole mentality of things in order to deal with the corona. So we're going to go to war with something we can't even see. Good call. Whilst former Sherman McChrystal has been invoking his 9/11 experience in order to prescribe lessons for today's leaders. Yeah, okay. You need to quit. That's what you need to do. Oops, sorry, that was out loud, wasn't it? At the same time, political actors are fully aware that these conditions of fear and panic provide a critical opportunity that can be exploited in order to pursue political, economic, and societal objectives. Not the next part 2 of this video, but a separate one after that. We're going to explore all of that. And boy, the list is massive. And it's probably not been mentioned in the mainstream media for sure. It's very likely, however, that dangers posed by the potential exploitation of corona for broader political, economic, and societal objectives far outweigh the immediate threat to life and health from the virus. And a lesson from recent history is instructive here, and he was referring to, the article writer was referring to 9/11, without a doubt. So let's look at what fear does. Your body on fear.
Your heart and thoughts race. Your palms sweat. Your stomach churns. You're afraid. This is your body on fear. Fear evolved in humans to protect us. When you're scared, your brain sets off an elaborate and coordinated response, even if there's no threat. These physical changes, from deep inside your brain all the way to the muscles in your legs, happen in seconds. That's because of your sympathetic nervous system, or your fight or flight response. It's part of your autonomic nervous system, which manages reflexes like breathing, digestion, and your heartbeat. Fear kicks your fight or flight response into overdrive. Your adrenal glands secrete adrenaline. Blood flow decreases to your brain's frontal lobe, which is responsible for logical thinking and planning. Your amygdala, a more animalistic part of your brain, takes over. Your heart rate and blood pressure increase. You breathe faster and your muscles tense up. Your pupils dilate so you can see the threat more clearly. Blood flows away from your extremities, making your hands cold and clammy and making you feel flushed and sweaty. Your digestion slows down. Your body doesn't know the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. That's why your fight or flight response kicks in during things like public speaking or being in a crowd. To your fear response, you're always running from a predator in the woods. It's just trying to keep you alive.
So what we can see there, what the problem is with fear and why it's used against humans to keep us in a perpetual state of fear, because it makes you much more moldable. You will do things and accept things that you would never normally do when you're in a constant state of fear like that. But if you notice, the one point that she made there in that little video was the reduced blood flow to the area of your brain that's responsible for your critical thinking. And so we tend to let things go. We don't examine things. We don't question things like we should. And that's because, and so when we're constantly kept in a fear, that's done on purpose. That is not just a happenstance of a bad headline writing. There is a method to that madness, and it's used in propaganda, and it's used in all sorts of things. It has been used throughout history. It's easy to check in that for sure. So we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of the idea that we're being pushed to fear all the time. And if you look at some of the words that are used, you will absolutely see it. You can see all of these fear words and all of the way they talk and very measured and how everything is done. You just watch the leaders. Just watch them very closely. You'll see that basically they're acting. They're running on a script and they're following along and doing very things. They follow the tones, the way they talk, the methods they use, the words that they use, how they try to bring you into the fold and all that kind of stuff. This is standard propaganda 101 and it's been used throughout history. So a little quick wrap-up blurb here before I'm finished this part one. And that's it's important for humanity of the day, which in our case now is us all around, to recognize that the human unit is ever evolving. I actually wrote this quickly, so I have actually this is the first time I'm proofreading it, so this could be kind of interesting. Ever being shaped and molded by the environment that they, them, or thee may find themselves in. This in turn means that each generation has a strong probability that they'll perceive and respond differently to events that we would have done at that same age. So as we're 16 ourselves, or whatever group you're part of, are going to react differently than what the 16-year-old would be reacting today. It is death-defyingly obvious that we have a disproportionately large amount of individuals struggling with anxiety issues, and they start from the psychosomatic all the way up to the balls to the wall panic and everything in between. This I don't recall as a kid having this issue. Not me personally, but in general, we didn't have this kind of large amount of people freaking out over everything. So we have an inflated event such as SARS-CoV-2 is surely levying, is that the right word there? Levying, I think I spelled right. A huge amount of stress chemical released in the wide selection of the population. We're talking about Ontario, Canada, but in general, it's going to apply across the planet to anyone with a human. And this in turn leads to health issues, including the impairment of the immune system. Stress chemicals are brutal, and stress chemicals wreak havoc on your body. And, the immune system is being one of them. So in that constant state of fear, with that constant stress, in the wintertime, cooped up in your house so you can't even get out, is a recipe for disaster. It's the dumbest thing ever. And the last line here is keeping people inside reduces exposure to the already limited sunlight. We have reducing vitamin D production. There's a limited potential while we're inside to acquire a mild version of a virus, and this is any virus that goes around, and then resulting in no antibody production at all should a more virulent second wave, which has happened in the past, and keep an eye out for that coming. I can guarantee you that governments and media are soon going to be pushing a second wave. Oh no, it's going to be worse than the rest. We've got to shut everything back down. Just keep an eye out for that. But if in fact the second wave does come that's legit, if this is a legit thing, virus-wise, you will have no protection with it whatsoever. So you end up being exposed to the worst of it. And that, of course, then feeds into, if anybody's used an agenda going, that feeds into it perfectly, doesn't it? Because now we're creating more. It's much like terrorist creation, and this gets done when you're one country and you just terrorize the living crap out of another. You're creating new terrorists, and so you're self-fulfilling that whole thing by creating people that, well, you can keep feeding and keep feeding. It's ridiculous and gross, but it's the way governments and many operate that way. Anyway, here we go. I'm now at the end top. Practice the art of silence. Have a great weekend. I hope to have a second part of this out in the next couple of days. Take care, my friends. Smile.